In almost every other European nation, Western democracy, you're not allowed to use force unless it's a last resort, unless it's absolutely necessary.
Hey, Grio fam, it's Gerren Keith Gaynor, Managing Editor of Politics at theGrio, and I'm here with Congressman Khanna of California. Congressman, welcome to theGrio. It's a pleasure to have you.
Gerren, great to be on.
So you reintroduced the Peace Act this week alongside Senator Padilla. Can you tell us more about what is the Peace Act? I know that it changes the standard of use of force, but tell us more about this act and why it was important for you to introduce in the final days of the 117th Congress.
This is something I've been working on for years. Lacey Clay, who used to represent Ferguson, now Cori Bush does. Lacey Clay and I worked on this bill and introduced it on the 5-year anniversary of what happened in Ferguson. And what it does is change the standard of force for police. I mean, right now in this country, you can use force if you think it is reasonable. We're the only country in Western democracies that has that standard. In almost every other European nation, Western democracy, you're not allowed to use force unless it's a last resort, unless it's absolutely necessary. And this is a big difference. It's the difference between a police officer shooting someone unarmed and saying, well, I thought they were reaching for a gun, where it really was that they were reaching for a wallet, and that being seen as reasonable and having no consequence, versus a standard that says, no, you can't shoot unless it was a absolutely necessary act. We made progress. We now have Senator Padilla behind it. It was part of the George Floyd Policing Act. It passed the House. We need it to pass the Senate.
Yeah, this is important because we often hear police officers say, you know, I fear for my life, and it can often be seem broad to many people. But how does this bill, which covers federal law enforcement, how does it ensure that law enforcement on the state and local level adhere to this new standard?
Well, it sets the standard, obviously, at the federal level, and then the hope would be that state and local jurisdictions would follow. But we don't have the ability to dictate all of the standards, so we can at least set a federal standard that then becomes a model.
Mm-hmm. Is there any incentive for local and state law enforcement to adhere to this standard?
In the George Floyd Act, which we did, we tried to get in funding tied to the adoption of this standard, so that the revocation of funding if this standard wasn't adopted, and that was part of the negotiations. We did get the Floyd Act through the House, but as I said, that bill is stuck in the Senate. And you know, this is the sobering truth, Gerren. Since George Floyd, the United States Congress has not passed a single bill to deal with police violence. The House has passed it, but we have not passed anything in the Senate. So there's been a lot of talk, but we still have not taken action.
And to that point, you know, because the Floyd bill tanked because of tanked when there were bipartisan negotiations on that bill, how confident are you that the Peace Act would get the necessary 60 votes in the Senate?
I think that there is a possibility we can bring it to the floor. You know, there are certain parts of the George Floyd Act that can have bipartisan appeal. The banning of the chokeholds, the part of the force standard being a last resort, which I said every other country has. These are common sense things we can agree on. Now, I also was for holding officers accountable and not giving them some blanket immunity, and that was part of George Floyd. Those are more, as you know, controversial provisions that are harder to get 60 votes in the Senate. This provision, I think, can get the 60 votes.
And the Peace Act is an acronym for police exercising absolute care with everyone. Can you talk more about why care is important to be at the core of policing in America, and why it seems that Black and Brown communities seem to be treated with the least care by law enforcement?
Well, this has been the history in this country, but I think that the stereotypes still prevail when police officers come and they see Black particularly Americans and brown Americans in certain communities. Their stereotypes and biases kick in, and they think that there is a threat. And unfortunately, they often act on that fear. And they have too often in this country acted in shooting or hurting or killing people who are totally unarmed, people who are innocent. And that mindset has to change. The mindset has to change culturally, but it also has to change legally. And if you create the law that you cannot use force unless it is absolutely necessary, deadly force that is, then you are changing the way an officer approaches a situation. They don't think that let's just pull our gun out unless really that is the last resort.
We talked a bit about the George Floyd bill. How confident are you that even in the next Congress, when Democrats will not be in the majority, do you think that police reform is something that can be worked on in a divided Congress, in the 118th Congress?
I think it will be difficult. The Republicans didn't give us a single vote on George Floyd. And so to get it through a Republican House is going to be hard. But I hear this frustration from people in my community who have said, look, George Floyd was years ago. You haven't done anything. You still haven't banned chokeholds. You still haven't banned no-knock warrants where people just barge into in a person's apartment and often engage in force. You still haven't changed the standard of force. When are we going to have these reforms? And the reality is it's going to be very hard in a Republican House. They haven't voted for any of them.
And President Biden, in absence of the George Floyd bill being passed this year, he signed an executive order on policing to reform federal law enforcement. How crucial will the executive pen be next year, considering that work might not be able to be done on police reform in the next Congress?
It's going to be the whole ball game because the Republican House isn't going to move on it. And so I think the president should do whatever he can through executive order to reform and hold accountable police where it comes to the unlawful use of force, where it comes to the situations where young, often Black men and Black women and brown men and women are being accosted by police in ways that are overly aggressive. And the president can at least, with the federal police force, set the standards.
And final question to you, Congressman. Next year, as I mentioned, you will be in the minority. How are you feeling about the next Congress, and what other work are you looking forward to working on?
Well, I'm looking forward to still trying to get certain things done. My two big focuses have been how do we get manufacturing back into America to create new jobs in this country, new industries, and I'll be working in a bipartisan way there. And then I've been working with tech companies to partner with historically Black colleges, HSIs, and land-grant universities to create new technology jobs. We did that in Benedict, in Claflin, in Mercy, in a number of other places, and I'm going to continue to work with the tech companies to do that.
Congressman Khanna, thank you so much for your time.
Really an honor. Appreciate it.